Okay, now we're moving on to the last section. So we're going to be working on the field, down through the midground, and we're going to deal with the foreground at the same time. So the first colour we're going to use is pale green, or just your lightest green, which you may have to mix with some white. So we're going to be working on the far side of the field and working down. So in these areas we want to keep our stabby marks as horizontal as possible, because the further away we are, the less detail we're going to be able to see. So starting from inside the tree here, I'm going to be stabbing my way along. Again, I'm not trying to draw any lines because we're replicating a painting, and if we look at the original, it's a very scrubby broken line that goes up and down. Not a great deal of undulation, but certainly some. So we're going to start here in the tree, on both sides of the piece of foliage that dips down, and now I can start to stabby my way along my very first line, following the bottom of the trees. Just at tree 2 and tree 3, the tall tree border, with a slight raise. I'm just making sure that I get rid of any still visible construction lines as I work my way across. So we're going just under the eyebrows, under the tree. Again, nice flat stabby motion. And then I can work my way with a nice broken pattern of horizontal stabby marks. So in between the two bouncing ball motifs here, we need to separate those. And the shadow actually ends just, this tooth of light in between the shadows ends somewhere here in the middle of tree 4. So I'm going to work my way under the bouncing ball, down through the H, the crossbar of the H, again keeping the strokes flat and small. And into the dip from that original giant bouncing ball motif. Now I've moved into this section and this section, I'm going to alter the angle of my inflections. So in this section, nice and flat because it's far away. This section, we're going to be a more broken pattern, but what we're aiming for is our inflections to point in to the painting from both sides. So if we're working on this side, we'll be striking at this angle, so it will appear that the grass and the stalks of oat are actually leaning into the painting, and from this side we'll be aiming that way. So again, it will lead the eye into the middle of the painting. So in this section, we're striking similar to what we did on the trees, about a 60-degree inflection, making sure that I'm blending the line between the foreground and the midground. So in our foreground, we have the biggest contrast between light and dark in our field. So on this side, I want my strokes to be pointing in this direction. So from right under the tree, we have some very light wisps, sky blues, very pale purples. really is a matter of just how far you want to take this, how close to the original you want to get. Now, just where the tree separates, we have some foliage coming down here that's quite dark. There is a small window here. So just above our little pale green marks, we're just going to add some light purple inflections there. And we're also going to add some lighter areas to the shadows under the trees on the far side of the field. And that will help to create the illusion of depth by pushing those trees backwards. And making our shadows more interesting. Okay, now I'm going to switch to pale brown, which is number 7. I'm going to work the same area that I just worked with the pale green, slightly underneath it. So again, stabby marks, horizontal inflections. The pale brown is going to blend with a pale orange. It's actually called yellow orange number 2, which is going to give us our poppies that are massed together but far away. So I'll keep going with my pale brown horizontal inflections, just knocking out any intense orange that needs to be calmed and made paler to keep that sense of distance, because obviously anything too hot and bright is going to come forward too dramatically. So again, working my way down through the crossbar of this H shape. And now we're going to have some inflections pointing into the center. A nice broken pattern, can be quite random, as long as we have some highlights in the foreground to contrast with the darks. We'll get the sense of the wheat and the poppies leaning and blowing in the breeze. This is a late summer day, and it's late in the afternoon, and that's why the sky is just holding or beginning to show a little glow of orange in the distance. So again, from the right, pointing in, just making sure that I'm blending out any of my construction lines. So we're going to have some above, some below, some directly on it. Okay, now the pale orange, yellow orange number 2. So just in the distance below the top line of green, we have some patches of poppies here, and they can be made quite simply by having our stabby marks horizontally separating the greens and pale browns. That goes all the way across to that slight raise crossbar again, just building up the layers. Again, taking out any areas that are too bright to be in the distance or too strong. Just brings me down underneath that reflected shadow on the left, and then as I come down to the foreground, change the angle of my inflections. So they stop being horizontal, which they are in this section, and start to lean in. Again, making sure I've got some above, some below, and some directly on my construction lines. And again, in from the right, some above, some directly on, some below, so we get that blended sensation. Okay, right, we'll keep those out of the box because we'll be using them again to layer up. So we're going to switch to our dark green. Which is number 22. So dark green number 22 we're going to use to make the shadow underneath the trees. So where our bouncing ball motifs began, we will be working to make an extended triangle. So just in here under the tree, we've got that pocket of light in that window. So we need to make sure that we're leaving some brightness here. And then underneath the tree, we've got a nice triangular shape with points coming down. But very simply, we're going to use our dark green to just stabby our way along here. So it's going to point down. The shadow meets the tree. So I'm following my very first bouncing ball. The darkest part of the shadow stops around about here where tree 5 and tree 4 meet. And we will be coming back to blend that with a light purple. So I'm just going to make sure that we've got those curves and teeth. Now we can switch from the dark green to a grey. So this is dark grey, deep grey, beg your pardon, and it's number 49. So I'm going to work along the top of the dark green shadow. Again, horizontal stabby motion. It's blending the green, so I'm getting some neat green, some neat grey, and some combination of the two. And it's just going to soften that shadow because it's further away. And then using that grey, I'm going to follow my very first bouncy ball. So if you remember, we had a very flat curve here, dipping down and rising up. So we have a curve, a curve. So all I'm doing is following that original curve, and of course it stops here under tree 2. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to my light purple. Again, I'm just going to soften the top of the shadow with the light purple. Now, if you remember, the second bouncy ball started in the same place, but pulled slightly down and away before reaching out and following parallel to the first bouncy ball motif. So here's our top bouncing ball shadow. Now I'm going to come in from under the tree, inflections on an angle, and then the inflections becoming flatter, following the dark shadow. Here is where the shadows separate. This is the top bouncing ball. The bottom bouncing ball comes in under that finger, bending down. And then the dip is here under tree 2, straight down from there, and that's where we get another bounce. That one reaches out beyond tree number 1. Okay, and then just on the reflection from the left hand side, again, nice flat stabby motion. Monet's brushstrokes were famously little ticks. We are just trying to replicate that painting style. Impressionism being quite forgiving. We don't have to be too accurate as long as we get it in the main areas. Okay, now I'm going to move away from the shadows into the foreground. So I'm going to do some additional blending. So my strokes are now, my inflections are now angled. So nice and broken. Little clusters all pointing into the center of the painting. Again, some slightly above the line, some on the line, some slightly below the line. And then from the other side, pointing in from the left, we have exactly the same thing. Little patches, little streaks of light purple. This painting was bought for $1,500. A collector called Fitzgerald bought it from Monet's dealer, Anon Durrell, and he sold it on to the Brown family, promised them that it would be worth $10,000 one day. It last sold for $2.2 million at Christie's auction in 1998. It was bought by a gentleman called Mickey Singer, who was the first person to digitize medical records. Headhunted by WebMD, got involved in all sorts of shenanigans there. I think once the air had cleared, he treated himself to a Monet painting. But later, gave it away to his old university. So this painting is currently at the Hahn Museum at Florida University. I'm sure if it came up for auction today, it would sell for at least 10 times that. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my sky blue. I'm just going to try and capture these wispy tops of oat stalks. They're just catching the sun. So I'm following the curve of that big bouncing ball motif. And my inflections are pointed in from this side. So nice scattering and a little denser around the curve, where the foreground meets the midground. Get some additional blending. I can also use my sky blue on the shadow in the distance here. So again, the pale cold colours recede, and they again will add to that sense of depth. Just above the purple, where the purple meets the dark green, just soften that line, and a little more on the dip. Just soften that purple again, and the same on the reflection on the left hand side. Angled inflections in the foreground, and a few just underneath the purple. Okay. Right, I'm going to switch back to my light green. I'm just going to add a little bit more clarity. I'm just going to brighten this area to give additional contrast between the shadow under the tree and the distant side of the field. Just going to bring that light horizontal finger down to meet the shadow. I'll have that lump raised up. So again, we're not drawing. We're just trying to replicate Monet's stabby style of painting, those flicks of oil paint. So again, just bringing the field up to blending into those shadows, knocking out any patches of colour that are too tense. So in between the two bouncing balls. Okay. Some additional blending above and below the bouncing ball motif. It really is up to you how far you take this. This section could take you half an hour. It could take you a whole day if you wanted to keep bashing away, adding additional colour and layers. Most of the colours that you'll find in the top section are also found down here, which is another method Monet uses to hold his paintings together. Okay, so I'm going to switch up the green. I'm going to go back to my number 53 olive green. And again, I'm looking for little clusters, inflections pointing in, knocking out any little bits of white paper that I still have. Looking at the original and finding little patches of combined greens. And then we'll have also inflections coming in from the right. Again, looking for those little patches of white that I no longer need. And of course, from the right hand side, my inflections are pointing into the middle. So we're guiding the viewer's eye into the centre. Okay. So we'll switch from the olive green. We're going to have something a little brighter for our foreground. So I'm going to I'm going to use the blue-green number 16 to do exactly the same thing in the foreground. So again, I'm not trying to paint every stalk, but I want a very interesting broken pattern. Just to demonstrate where some stalks are catching the light, others are caught in shadow. We're building up a textured and interesting foreground without worrying too much about getting every stroke right. Okay. Okay, the last little bit on the field. So again, I'm going to go back to my light purple. I'm just going to increase the size of that shadowy band with horizontal strokes. Lots of little inflections, building up those textures. Softening those shadows. Okay. And then back to my pale orange, yellow orange. Just following along that curve. Underneath the purple shadow. Down into the dip. Underneath that reflection. Okay. Right, we're going to jump to number 36, which is the salmon pink. And again, just a few inflections, it's a little bit brighter, nice and broken. And again, just a little bit in between the fingers of those bouncing ball motifs. Just knocking out some of that dark green. Softening the far side of the field with my broken pattern of salmon pinks, bringing it down to the shadow from the left, through the crossbar of the H,